Is it what?
Iran and Israel.
No, I'm not going to speak about that.
Said that last week.
I spoke about Iran last. You're right. I did speak about Iran last week.
Iran. That's what some people came to.
Okay, about Iran and Israel?
Oh, that's what you said you were doing. Yes. C'est tout.
Exactly. Exactly.
Welcome, everybody. Hello, guys. Welcome, everybody. I have some program announcements for the next 2 coming weeks. So tomorrow we have an osteoporosis talk in the auditorium. It is in person only. It will not be held in Zoom. So if you're interested, please show yourself in person in the auditorium. It's at 2 p.m. On Friday, we have Friday afternoon at the movies. It is Freakier Friday. And that is in the auditorium at 2 p.m. On Monday, May 25th, we have Lundi Cinéphile, which is the French movies. It's Mon Gâteau Préféré. It's in French with French subtitles. And then on the 27th, it will be held here in the multipurpose room. You've got to read this, where librarians will be talking about their must-reads of the season. That will be held in Zoom. So, Mr. Dwoskin, it's your turn.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you. Thank you again so much for coming. It's just such a pleasure, and thank you, Angela. It's such a pleasure to be in this room because I could see everybody clearly. It's not dark. It's bright. It really is lovely. We are, of course, living through these continuous crises, we'll call them. It started at the very, very end of February. And we're now at the almost mid-March, and the whole world is still kind of upside down and holding its breath, because the world knows that whatever is happening in the Middle East can't keep happening forever. You pointed out correctly. I said last week that I would speak about Israel and Iran and the crisis this week. Of course, it left my mind, but that's fine. We'll do that. We'll do that instead. We'll start off by saying that how many of you saw the interview with Mr. Netanyahu on 60 Minutes yesterday? Sunday. Quite a few of you. Okay. So what was your impressions? I'll tell you what my impressions were. I had a very positive impression. The man, when you compare and contrast him to Donald Trump, it's like day and night. Day and night. They both have, in a certain sense, the same philosophical and political outlook. They have the same, we'll call them foibles. But the contrast between the two of them is just so unbelievable, which tells you, and I would have to say that all of this contrast is to the advantage of Mr. Netanyahu and the disadvantage of Mr. Trump. Just to illustrate like one tiny speck of difference, the Iranians were supposed to present a proposal, a counter proposal to Trump's proposal, and he looked at it and says, "I call this garbage." So, I mean, there is not a way in the world that Mr. Netanyahu would ever use that word to describe, even his worst enemies, because it's just not diplomatic. It's not presidential. It's not the way leaders of countries are supposed to conduct themselves. But, Mr. Trump has his own style. It's worked for him, he feels, up till now. So, why not continue it? The interview really displayed more clearly the differences between the United States' goals in Iran and Israel's goals in Iran. And these differences will only get bigger and bigger as time goes on, because clearly it's in the interest of the United States to stop this as fast as it possibly can. Today, you might have read or heard that the cost of living index just was published this morning. It showed that the U.S. cost of living is going up by 3.8% a year. That's a very high number. It's a number that hasn't been that high briefly in 2023, but before that, it goes to the COVID, lockdowns, that the cost of living was so great. Even more distressing is that number of 3.8% is higher than the average wage increases. So what that means is that the average American is feeling that he's got less money to buy the same goods as he had 6 months ago. So it's putting pressure on the budgets of many people whose budgets were already pressured. So what that means for Donald Trump is looking ahead to the November elections. We'll speak about that also a bit. He's saying, I'm in a bad shape. We need to change things and change it fast. The fastest way to change it is to solve the issue in the Persian Gulf, to allow all the ships and to allow free trade of gas, fertilizer, and oil to leave the Persian Gulf. And that way, demand and supply will come into balance and the prices of oil will go down. Right now in the US, the price of gasoline is over $4.50 a gallon, which in actual fact is getting close to what our prices are. If you kind of, figure it out, gallons and liters, it's not all that different, because we're about $8 a gallon. We're about $8 a gallon Canadian, and if you change that to American money, it's somewhere close to six something. So it's still cheaper, but we're both are ridiculously high. I'll put it like that. So what Mr. Netanyahu revealed or spoke about in his interview was that the goals of Israel are not exactly the same as the goals of the United States. And here's how they differ. They differ because Israel's interest is to make Iran a nuclear-free country, to make sure that there is no way that Iran can get a nuclear weapon, and to break all the steps to let Iran get that nuclear weapon. For the United States, that's not the top priority. For them, the top priority is to open the Persian Gulf, get the ships going again, and lower the price of gas and fertilizer. So you could see two completely different approaches. Remember that the Iranians shot missiles extremely effectively at Israel. Extremely effectively. They didn't shoot any missiles at the United States. So the threat of nuclear weapons ever hitting the United States by Iran are tiny. The effect of nuclear weapons hitting Israel, unlikely as it may seem, are much greater. So that's Netanyahu's first priority, to stop the nuclear weapons, stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And this has always been Israel's greatest fear. The second priority that Israel has is to stop Iran from supporting all of its allies around the Middle East, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen. Hamas are pretty well neutralized at this point. They haven't really put up much of a resistance since Israel undertook that tremendous campaign in Gaza, resulting in pretty well the destruction of the whole Gaza Strip, 70,000 people killed, and the country left without any economy whatsoever. But in Lebanon, the Hezbollah still, although the Hezbollah made the same mistake they made before, which is to support Iran by attacking Israel, they got hit back really hard. They got hit back so hard this time. They got hit back last time also very, very hard. The difference between this time and last time is this. The composition of the Lebanese government is not the same today as it was last time. The Hezbollah have had several attacks on Israel. There was one when they kidnapped two people and held them hostage, and Israel counterattacked. Israel ended up occupying southern Lebanon for 20 years, roughly, from 1980 to 2000. Then around 2006, there was another incident where the Hezbollah attacked Israel. Israel hit back so hard at that time that the leader of Hezbollah said, had I known how hard they were going to hit us, we never would have started up in the first place. But of course, that lesson was forgotten on October the 7th, the day after the massacre in the Negev by the Hamas. Hezbollah started shooting rockets at Israel again. Hezbollah accumulated an enormous store of rockets, a huge amount of underground bunkers, tunnels. They have big support among the people who live with them. You know that the Hezbollah is not just a militia, but it's a political party in the Lebanese government. It's a political party that supplies education, healthcare, and social services to its constituents in the southern and eastern parts of Lebanon. So, in some similar way, Hamas was doing kind of the same thing in Gaza, but the two situations are parallel but not exactly the same. In any case, what's different now in Lebanon is a new government took over, and it was very clear from the start that this whole campaign against Hezbollah and Lebanon was Hezbollah's fault. Because they're the ones who shot the rockets at Israel. Israel didn't do anything to Lebanon before then. And Israel has been medium careful, not 100% careful, but medium careful to hit back at only Hezbollah and Shiite targets in Lebanon. In other words, to try to divide the Shiites and Hezbollah from the rest of the Lebanese population. It didn't work out that well, especially when some dumb soldiers started knocking down statues of Christ, and it got publicized in every single journal. And this is to do with a combination of bad training by the Israeli army and I would call it religious fanaticism of a new breed of Israeli soldier who is completely unaware of what goes on around the world, and who is just nationalistic and as religiously fervent as many people are in that country. So these mistakes are very costly for Israel, extremely costly, far more than the cost of replacing the statue that got knocked over twice, by the way, two different ones. So the government is different in the sense that the Hezbollah before had a veto on any acts of the Lebanese government. The Shiite population in Lebanon is about 1/3. It's about 1/3 Christian and about 1/3 Sunni Muslim. But in terms of politics, the Shiites were so united that they didn't split up their vote among many different political parties as was done by the other groups. And therefore, the power that the Hezbollah had and their ally Amal, another political party representing the Shiites, those two held a blocking position in the government. So the government could not pass any legislation or do anything without their approval. Let's go back to that horrible explosion in the port of Beirut, remember it? When this ammonium nitrate blew up and almost a quarter of the whole city was flattened by the explosion. The fault of that explosion was with the Shiites who held the port. But no one was ever blamed. No one was ever put in jail. No one was ever, punished because they had their finger on the government, and the government couldn't do anything without their approval. And any proposal to look into this and see who was to blame was quickly squashed by that party. So the difference today is that party's power has gone down a lot in Lebanon, and the people, including Shiites in Lebanon, finally have come to the conclusion that the Hezbollah are more of a liability than they are of an advantage. And so given that, and given that the president of Lebanon has been much more forceful in saying that Hezbollah must give up all its arms, and if they want to join the Lebanese army, they could, then kind of the shoe is on the other foot when it comes to them. So to go back to what Israel wants Iran to stop funding the Hezbollah, because they see the Hezbollah as being kind of on the back leg as it is. And without Iranian support and money coming in, and Iranian direction, Iranian supplies, Iranian drones, Iranian missiles, even Iranian advisors, military advisors, without those things coming to Lebanon, Israel feels that the Shiites will be very marginalized. Many, many voices in Lebanon today are calling for negotiations and even a peace treaty with Israel, which of course the Hezbollah opposes. So that's Israel's second requirement in this war. Now, what about the United States? Do they care about Hezbollah? No. Are they affected directly or indirectly by Hezbollah? No. So the United States' goals are different from Israel's goals. The third ally of the Hezbollah are the Houthis in Lebanon, in Yemen. And the Houthis in Yemen have been very quiet, extremely quiet, during this whole process of the Israeli-American war against Iran. They were active previously. They were active again after the Gaza war started. They shot missiles at ships in the Red Sea. They reduced the amount of shipping in the Red Sea by 80% because obviously ships don't want to get hit. That caused the revenues of Egypt in the Suez Canal to also go down by 80% because the Red Sea, of course, leads into the Suez Canal. What that did was it caused ships going to Europe from Asia to go all the way around the bottom of Africa and come back around to Europe via the Atlantic Ocean, instead of going in the Indian Ocean through the Bab el-Mandeb is called, and other straits, like the Straits of Hormuz. The Bab el-Mandeb is another narrowing of the waters going into the Red Sea, coming up the Red Sea into the Suez Canal, out of the Suez Canal, and boom, you're right into the heart of Europe. So the Houthis have not really done a lot this time because they were so, I would say, blasted the last time by American and Israeli aircraft, which destroyed the shipping terminals, which destroyed the oil facilities, which destroyed some of the key infrastructure in Yemen as a kind of a battle, let's say. So those are two of Israel's priorities, as I said, 1 and 2. Does Israel care that the Persian Gulf is opened? Yes, because they're also having a lot of gasoline prices and raising prices in the country. And for those of you who know, Israel is probably one of the most expensive countries in the whole world compared to the earnings of the people. And Israel is also one of the countries in the world where the gap between the rich and the poor is growing and not shrinking. So there is definitely a portion of the country, a large portion, which is really affected by these kind of prices. But, and here's the but, Israel has its own natural gas supply. It's got enough natural gas that it exports when it can. Israel can get oil from lots of places in the world, not being tied to the Persian Gulf. When the Arab boycott was on of Israel, of course, all the countries in the Persian Gulf plus Iran are Arab countries. None of them were shipping oil to Israel. They managed fine. They were getting oil from Mexico, from Colombia, from where else? Lots of places. Venezuela, when they were shipping oil in those days. Yeah, there's lots of oil producers not tied to, and even the United States, which exports oil. So Israel is not desperate and falling apart for oil like other countries are. There's many countries, especially in Asia, South Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, but the first three countries that I mentioned that have, less than 2 months supply of gasoline, less than 2 months supply of jet fuel, and even more seriously, the supply of fertilizer at a time when planting season is now, springtime. The supply of fertilizer that they use comes from the Persian Gulf. It comes from natural gas, which is made into fertilizer. So these countries have already stopped, changed their whole lifestyles because of this war at the Persian Gulf. In other words, it's not just the idea of the prices going up of fuel that's changed their lifestyle. The government has said, we want, for example, turn off air conditioning 6 hours a day. Stop cooking with gas. And in India and Pakistan, even Sri Lanka, most households, they have these portable gas canisters. You've seen what they are, like a ballon, like a portable gas canister. When you finish it, you bring it to a station and they fill it up for you, or a truck comes by and takes the old one and gives you a new one. All of that that's in there is natural gas. That's it. It's propane. It's a kind of natural gas. So if you can't cook with that because they don't have any, what are you going to do? That's the serious issue that this has come down to. That means restaurants have to close. People have to start scrimping and saving their gas. Some places, the poor ones, are starting to use firewood. And using firewood means cutting down trees. So the effects of this crisis are really quite far-reaching. None of which, of course, was predicted by Trump when he started the war. That was the last thing he would ever have thought of. And of course, he says he's destroyed Iran so completely that they're begging for a deal, and yet the deal that Iran proposed yesterday that they sent him, he called it garbage. So if they're begging for a deal, how could they send a garbage proposal? What was in the proposal? Two things. Number one, the United States has to pay reparations to Iran for all the damage they caused. Number two, that Iran is officially recognized as the manager of the Persian Gulf. So none of those things were there before the war, right? The Persian Gulf was a free and open passageway, and now Iran says, "Oh, we're going to run it, and we can decide who goes through with it." So this is the Iranian proposal after the United States destroyed supposedly everything in the country. How does that make any sense? It doesn't really, right? So it means that the United States hasn't won the war. In fact, they lost the war because, we see what the results are. And the United States, of all places, and by the way, North and South America together, have suffered the least in all of this whole crisis. Everywhere else, Africa, Europe, Asia, have all suffered the most because of this crisis. And there's no kind of exit. There's no, nothing on the horizon that says that how this is going to be solved or what's going to happen. Now so leaving that aside, this is what the situation is now in Israel. let's talk now about the country and what's coming up. What's coming up is elections. Now, what I find so weird is so much of the news coverage, if you watch the American coverage, has to do with the November elections in the United States. Everything to do with redistricting, everything to do with primaries, all have to do with the November elections. Who has elections before November? How about Quebec? Like, do I see CNN covering the Quebec elections in October? Are they interviewing Madame Frechette, our new prime minister? It's so funny. It's so funny how, news coverage is so, I won't say biased, but I'll say kind of blind in a certain way. The Israeli elections are also coming up in October. And I would have to say this, that it's probably close to a record of an Israeli government surviving 4 years, because most of the time they don't. They somehow collapse before then. Because we all know that Israel has never, since its history, and since the first election in 1949, which is 77 years ago, they've never had one party win more than half of the votes. So what that means is that every single government, and there's been 23 so far, have all relied on coalitions. And when you have a coalition, it's easy for a government to fall apart because somebody says, I don't like it. Somebody says, I get a better offer. Somebody says, you're not taking me seriously. And before you know it, they're out of the government and the government collapses. I'm sorry. Oh, you think so? I'm not so sure. Mr. Netanyahu has been such a skillful politician, and you see how skillful he was answering the reporters' questions. He said, you don't expect me to answer. Or he said in advance, I'm going to dodge your question. Or he said in advance, I don't give out state secrets on 60 Minutes. I mean, at least he connected with the audience more. He was connecting with the audience more than he was with the interviewer. Let's put it like that. And the audience could see, how skillful he is. And Israeli politics is a rough game. It's not. It's not politics in Prince Edward Island. It's you're talking now. Lots of different factions, lots of ideas, lots of parties, lots of trade-offs, lots of personalities. So he's managed to survive as being the longest-serving prime minister in Israel, and it wasn't by luck. It was by his very skillful political, his intelligence, his skillful politics, his bribing, promising, doing everything he could to stay in power, and that has been what he's done. But, and here's the but, we all know in every democracy that people get tired of the leaders that they have, sooner or later. That's bound to happen. We've seen it happen just about everywhere, in every democracy, and thankfully, the elections that just took place, we were May, April, March, so we're talking now April, last month in Hungary, tossed out the Mr. Orban, who was in power for 16 years in a row, who had, the media under his thumb, who skewed the rules as much as the Republicans are trying to do in the U.S., and he still got kicked out because people were just tired of him. The polls in Israel are showing that Netanyahu will also get kicked out. But it's a much more complicated issue in that point. So where has Israeli politics led at this moment? You could say that if you took a look at the list since 1949, when the first elections were held, of every single political party that ever ran for office, and you put them down in this print on this wall, they would reach from the ceiling to the floor. That's how many political parties have come and gone. In the last election alone, 33 parties ran for election. Okay, so, and that's just one election. Imagine multiply it out over 24 elections, and you get the idea. So these parties come and go. But what's important to know is that there is a stability in the country, or we'll call it a stable division in the country. And this division works in 4 different and almost equal size pieces. One piece are the ultra-Orthodox. That piece is growing and growing and growing in population as opposed to everyone else. And therefore, their political power is also growing and growing and growing. What's unique about the Israeli political system? You know what's unique? In 1948, when the country was set up, they decided on 120 seats in the Knesset, in the parliament. 120 seats representing the 12 tribes of Israel times 10. Today, there are 120 seats in the Knesset. So that's pretty remarkable in a way. Of course, what that means is that each representative has a lot more people, but they don't get elected by district anyway. But they just have so many more people voting to get one constituent, one representative elected. So the ultra-Orthodox at the beginning, out of 120 seats, they had 4, 6, something like that. Today, they are 16, 17, 18, that amount. And their vote is extremely stable. That means that their voters never change parties. They always keep voting for the same party. Statistics say by 2050, a quarter, so the ultra-Orthodox themselves are about 14% of the Israeli population, give or take. By 2050, 25% of all children in elementary school will be ultra-Orthodox. So that just tells you how the demography is changing in the country. Not only that, but last year, 2025, 125,000 Israelis left the country for good. Pretty well none of them were ultra-Orthodox. So, you can sort of see where things are going. This ultra-Orthodox group, in the beginning of Israeli politics, in the beginning, their interest was to be part of any coalition of any government. Didn't matter if it was a Labour government or a Likud government. They wanted to be part of the government to get money for themselves. That has been their primary let's say, modus vivendi all along. They have been changing lately somewhat to move much more to the right in sort of Israeli politics in general, with certain exceptions. But now their issues are, of course, to get money for their institutions, and of course to keep their boys out of the army. Now, the keeping the boys out of the army part is a much newer element, because although they never served in the army, but beforehand, certainly before the Gaza war, the army didn't really want them. They'd say, what are we going to do with these guys? They're completely untrained. They're not modern. They don't know. They couldn't add up a column of figures in their head. They don't know anything about science. They don't know how to attach a battery to anything. So, they're just going to be a drag. But the war has caused such a deficit in the Israeli recruitment, in the soldiers. It's required people to be serving who normally would serve, let's say, they would do the reserve. Okay, so Israel has a standing army of young people let's call them 18 to 21-year-old people. But that's a very tiny part of the whole Israeli armed forces. The rest of them are the reserves, people who up to 50 years have to serve, and I'm not sure exactly how much it is. I think it's like 24 months in 5 years, something around that. But they've called on so many of them that some people are being called up all the time to serve in reserves. And so the economy is, of course, hurt. People are tired. People can't get back to their work. And meantime, all of these yeshiva students, who now number 70,000, have gotten off from serving in the military. And the Israeli courts have gotten fed up. So the Israeli courts have said time and time again, this is illegal. The government must do something to, recruit them. The government has always tried to avoid that because their political parties say, if you do that, we're leaving the government, and the government will fall. So the government has managed delay after delay after delay. The last time I saw it was they were on the 18th delay to comply with the ruling of the Supreme Court. And they're saying, oh, we're passing a new bill. We're passing a new bill. But, of course, the bill isn't passed. And, the government hasn't recruited anybody and hasn't arrested anybody. Even worse is that they have managed to convince a small number of these ultra-Orthodox students, the ones who are, let's call them the least fanatic in a way, to join the military in a special units called, they're called the Hasmonaim Brigade, like after the Maccabees, and where they will be given 100% kosher food. They'll be given 100% no duties on the Sabbath, where they will never see a woman ever, 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 God forbid. And they will never hear a woman singing, and they will never just see a woman. So there's a few, and I mean a few hundred of these soldiers who have managed to be recruited. And get the special rules. When you're in the military, you have to wear your uniform all the time. When you're off duty, you have to wear your uniform till you get home. These ultra-Orthodox guys have been given exemption because if they show up in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods wearing a uniform, they'll be attacked. So they don't have to wear their uniform. The but is that when you look at who has been putting Israel in the worst light, meaning allowing settlers to kill and burn and loot Palestinian homes in the West Bank, knocking down statues of Christ in Lebanon when they get there. This isn't the average Israeli soldier that's doing this. These are people who are recruited from the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox ranks. So their worldview is not the same as the liberal worldview of many people in Israel. We'll even call them most, but we'll say many. They're a special case, and recruiting them has had the advantages and disadvantages. Let's just leave it in that certain sense. There hasn't been, their example has not led to an overwhelming example of regular ultra-Orthodox people being called up to serve. The ultra-Orthodox parties, their viewpoint on that is, if we have to give in to allow yeshiva students to be conscripted, what we would say is we want the losers of our society, the ones who got kicked out of yeshiva for bad behavior, the ones who are taking drugs, the ones who are troublemakers. We want those people to be recruited and not all our good boys. But imagine if that's the element that Israel is recruiting in their army, they're handing over like the worst of the worst to be in the army. So, how is that going to benefit anybody? But that concession is about this big compared to what is supposed to happen, which is that everyone should be conscripted. To my mind, if Israel was serious about conscripting these people, they have to do one thing first: build huge jails. That's how you start. Once you start building huge jails, people say, well, who's going to be in those jails? And that's when you start calling them up and arresting them. Because they can show up by 100, they could have 100,000 people at a demonstration in 5 seconds. They don't use the internet, but somehow or other they can get 100,000 people onto the streets in a 5-minute, advance notice. Who are you going to arrest? They all have black hats, white shirts, and black pants. Like, how are you going to know who's who? You know? So the government has basically been avoiding this problem. The Likud government has avoided this problem from the time they were ever elected. And so-called, the opposition is promising differences. So let's look at the opposition now. Let me just check my watch. Okay. So let's look at how has the opposition aligned itself. One of the most likely candidates for prime minister in opposition to Netanyahu is Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett was the former prime minister. I attended a lecture of his right here in Montreal at Federation, and he gave, were you there? Yeah. He gave a remarkable speech as if he was running for office. And this is already, what, a year-ish ago, something like that. Mr. Bennett is a very interesting person. He is, first of all, his name is Bennett. Start with that. It's not an Israeli name. His parents were Americans who moved to Israel. He made a fortune in the high-tech field. You know, Israel is a leader in high-tech. Mr. Bennett made multi-millions in a high-tech business, and then he went into politics. He went into politics as a kind of moderate religious person with right-wing political ideas. That's about a good description of him. He wears a kippah, but this kippah is the size of a US silver dollar, we'll say. He is he led a party called the Religious Zionist Party in the elections. That party won 7 seats out of 120. And he became prime minister. So imagine how you could be leader of a country with 7 seats out of 120. That's 6% of the vote. That means 94% of the people don't want you. And yet, he became prime minister because he was seen as the best shot, the best chance for an opposition party to form a coalition government against Mr. Netanyahu. So what Mr. Bennett said was, okay, you could be against Mr. Netanyahu for a million reasons. We don't care what the reasons are. You don't like how he dresses, you don't like what he eats, you don't like his wife. Whatever you don't like about Mr. Netanyahu, you come to my camp and we'll make a government. So his government consisted of a rainbow of Israeli political parties, excluding Likud party itself, which is the nationalist party led by Mr. Netanyahu, excluding the ultra-Orthodox parties, the 2 of them, Sephardi and Ashkenazi, and excluding the ultra-right racist parties, which to my mind should never be allowed to run for Knesset altogether, because there's a law in Israel that says no racists are allowed to hold public office. So excluding those people, pretty well everybody else, except 2 Arab parties, got into his government. And he did a remarkable thing, and I will say this 1,000,000 times over. He took an Arab party into the government for the first time in Israeli history. Why is that so? Why is that such a remarkable thing? Because the Arabs in Israel are 21% of the population. And they've never been in a government. They've never had a minister. If you don't have power in a party, if you don't have power in a government, how are you going to assure that the government is going to treat your people fairly and give them the opportunities that everybody else has? Remember, these parties were elected by Arab votes. So it wasn't as if the Arabs said, you know what, we don't believe in the state of Israel. It's a Zionist state. We don't recognize Israel as a country. We're not voting. Okay? Some Arabs do that because the percentage of turnout of Arab voters is always somewhere around 10% less than the Jewish voter turnout. But still, that still means a lot of them voted. And this party got 5 seats. The Ram party got 5 seats. Those 5 seats were essential for Mr. Bennett's government because with the Ram party in, you know how many seats this coalition had? 61 out of 120. So now you can see how what thin ice he was skating on. And the other parties in his coalition ranged from moderate nationalist parties, center parties, secular parties, Russian-oriented parties, labor, left-wing type parties, and the Arab Party. There was a lot of parties in his government, a lot. That means a lot could go wrong, and a lot did go wrong. What mostly went wrong is that Mr. Netanyahu went to his own party and filched 2 members out of his party and promised them cabinet seats if they would defect. And they did. So his number went from 61 to 59. Guess what? 59 is not half of 120. And the government fell. And Mr. Netanyahu won re-election, not by a big amount, but he won re-election. 64 seats, I think he got. And those 2 people who defected, they were made cabinet ministers. So he kept his promise in that way. That's why I say he's a very skillful politician in the way he runs things. This time, the main opposition leaders in the Israeli opposition, which are Mr. Bennett, who we've spoken about, he actually hasn't named his new party, and we're still like 6 months away from the election. It was called the Bennett Party up until now. He got a name for it, right? Yeah, that's nice. Because names of political parties in Israel change as often as you change clothes. I'm not you change clothes. I mean, the lady behind you changing clothes. Then there is Mr. Gantz, Mr. Eisenkot, and Mr. Lapid. Those are 4 leaders of different political parties who Mr. Lapid, and who was a former leader of the opposition, the head of a center secularist party, he decided, not right away, but soon enough, to join with Mr. Gantz to make a party. What's the name of that party? I forget it now. I forget. He called it something. The names, like I say, could mean nothing. Renewal, Renaissance, I don't know what. Could be any. Pick a name out of ChatGPT, and that's the name of a party. That's how fast they change their names. So, what's interesting about this party and Mr. Bennett is he pledged the following: I will not make a government with the ultra-Orthodox, and I will not make a government with any, quote, non-Zionist party, which means the Arab parties, which includes the Ram party that he had before. The Ram party is certainly not anti-Zionist. The Ram party said, we agree that Israel is a Jewish state. We're happy to live as Israeli citizens, as loyal citizens. And all we want is, the same goods that you give to every other constituency, you give to our constituency. Now, the origin of that party, and I'm saying origin because the difference between the origin and today is very large, lay in the Islamic movement. Okay, so This party represented people who were religiously conservative, especially people from the south of Israel, the Bedouin community, whose roots, the roots of that Islamic movement are in the Islamic Brotherhood, which was founded in Egypt in the 1920s. So it was a kind of Islam-oriented political party. But that was in the 1920s. We're now in the 2020s. That's 100 years later. The opposition, of course, to this party among the Israeli right wing says they are Hamas. Sure, if you cut it out by a bunch of different steps, you end up with Islamic movement, which Hamas is also an Islamic party. But, you know, obviously they're not the same in any way. The other two Arab parties, which did not get in the government and which are not going to get in the government, are a secular communist Arab party, which has a Jewish element to it, called Chadash, or new in Hebrew, but is a party which is extremely left-wing in its orientation, very, very secular in its orientation, a party which you could say is anti-Zionist, in the sense that what they want is that Israel should become a completely secular state and every citizen should have the same rights. I know it sounds revolutionary that every citizen should have the same rights, but in Israel, only the Jews have rights that other people don't have. So that's what that party wants. And then there's another party associated with that party called Tal, which is more in the middle between the other two parties. Now, there's even a third party called Balad, which did not get any seats in the last election. They are the ones who are the most fanatically anti-Zionist, and they're the ones who say, you know, we want to live in one Palestinian state with the West Bank and Gaza, and that should be our country. So this party made the foolish mistake of not joining the other parties in the last election in order to boost their seats. This time, that party did say, we are going to join with the other parties to make one joint list, and they will succeed to get a lot of votes. The Ram party told that list, look, I'm going to run with you guys, but if we are called on to join a government, we will join and you could stay in the opposition. That's what the deal was made among the Arab parties. But you see, the Arabs are so discredited as a group by the October 7th massacres that there's almost nobody in Israel, no Jewish person who will stand up and say, I agree to have the Arabs as part of the government. Because look at what they did to us and how could we trust them? Basically, that's what it comes to. So, therefore, now to get back to my original thought, Mr. Bennett said, I will not form a government with the Arabs. I will not form a government with the ultra-Orthodox. Now, sure, that's what he would like. That's not what the polls are saying. The polls are not saying that. The polls are saying, roughly, that Mr. Netanyahu's present coalition would get somewhere around 52 or 53 seats out of 120, but he can't go any farther. Mr. Bennett's coalition would get maybe 54 seats or 55 seats out of 120. But wait a minute, you need the 60. So how are you going to make a government without either the Arabs or the ultra-Orthodox in your government? You see? So it becomes a conundrum. It becomes a conundrum. Are there ways out of it? Of course there's ways out of it. This is politics. This is Israel. There's always a way out of it. The way out of it would be that, say Mr. Bennett gets more seats than, and he can assemble a bigger coalition than the Likud can, That seems to be likely what's going to happen now. And I'm just saying now because, the Iran war could change everything. What could happen is Mr. Bennett can say, I'm keeping my promise. I'm not allowing the Ram party in my government, but we make a deal with the Ram party that you will support us from outside the government. You won't get any seats, but, anytime you want something, call me up, and my secretary will go to your village and say, oh, you need a new sewer? Okay, we'll put a new sewer in there. Yeah, that's what politics is. That's what it's all about. You're representing people. They want results. How will let's pretend that Mr. Bennett's government succeeds. Let's pretend. Would this make any difference to Israel? And would it make any difference to the Jews in the world? I say it will make an enormous difference. That's my feeling. What's the enormous difference? Why do we have an explosion of anti-Semitism going on around the world? In Canada, in the US, all around the world. It's more than an explosion, it's a plague, it's an epidemic. Now, why is that? Okay. My feeling is there's a multiple layers of reasons for this happening. There's not one reason. There's many, 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 many reasons. You cannot disassociate Israel from the epidemic of anti-Semitism around the world. Yes, there are people who hate Jews having nothing to do with Israel. They say Jews are controlling the media, Jews are controlling the banks, Jews are communists and capitalists at the same time. There's a lot of, I would call, native-rooted anti-Semitism that's all over the place. Left over from the days of the church who said that the Jews killed Christ, which of course, they didn't have CNN at the time, so we don't have any filmed video of it. But certainly it wasn't the Jews who were in power at the time. Certainly the judges weren't Jewish at the time. Certainly the governor of Judea wasn't Jewish at the time, but leave all that aside. So that's what I would call native anti-Semitism. It was there before Israel was born in 1948, that's for sure. It was there, give or take 2,000 years worth, okay? But there is a new element of anti-Semitism based on what Israel is doing. And Israel's acts are reflecting on Jewish communities all around the world who have nothing to do with Israel. So what are those acts? Well, the Gaza war, for one, the persecution of Palestinians in the West Bank, for two, we'll call it nowadays, maybe the manipulation of that dumb president in the United States to do something that Israel wanted them to do, and he could be convinced, if he gains, if his picture gets in the paper, he could be convinced of anything because he has no principles. So these elements, the last three elements that I mentioned, under a new government would really decrease, meaning the unneeded cruelty toward the Arab populations. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that the Palestinian population are all angels, because they're not. But just the other day, the police arrested and beat up an Arab-Israeli liaison to the police themselves in the Negev. He's a lawyer. They beat him to a pulp. Why? Because supposedly his music was playing too loud. And when the police showed up to tell him to turn it down, he might have said to them, mind your own business. And that was the end. The picture of it, his face is all bashed in. Now, if this was a Jewish guy, for sure this wouldn't have happened. For sure. 100% for sure. The current minister of prisons have said, we want Israelis we want Arabs in Israeli prisons to be treated as badly as humanly possible. As badly, meaning starved, beaten, and raped. All of this is not made up. It's all in the news. It's all there. Remember, we have a free Israel's a free country. There's a free press. Reporters say everything. Nowadays, you see it today, it's on the internet tomorrow. So these people who are doing this stuff have no clue of how this is going to be seen in the outside world. And to go back to what I was talking about, the knocking down the statue of Jesus, because they are of the mindset that everybody in the world is against us. So no matter what we do, we can't do anything wrong because they're all against us anyway. And whatever we do, we're going to be blamed. So we might as well at least do it and get it off our chest. And besides, we're taking revenge for all those people who were massacred by the Hamas. So that's the mindset of the people who are running the government today in Israel. That isn't going to be the mindset of a new government in Israel. At least they may even have some of the same feelings, but they'll have the common sense to know that they can't let this stuff appear in world media, because look at how it's caused us. It's caused Israel huge amounts of harm. Huge. Talk about just the Eurovision song contest. 5 countries said we're boycotting because of that. Mr. Netanyahu himself is under indictment. If he puts his foot in Canada, of all places, he's supposed to get arrested because of the International Court of Justice. Now, the International Court of Justice is not a court of justice. That we know for sure. But the but is, if Israel didn't behave so blatantly against its enemies, against the Arabs, there would not be this huge upswell of anti-Israeli feeling all around the world. That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. And if the government is changed, the tone will change. And it's the tone that counts these days. The perceptions, the all of that kind of thing. Now, what is for sure true is that the Hamas massacres of 2023 have polluted the feelings of Israelis that they could ever have peace with the Arabs for a generation. A generation has to pass. People will forget. No, not forget, but it won't be as strong a feeling as before. And only at that time, can you pick up the pieces and say, okay, let's see what we have here. But one thing is a constant in the Middle East and in Israel, is that the Palestinian people who live in Gaza and who live in the West Bank, there's 4 million of them. There's 4 million of them. They're not going anywhere. Oh boy. It's a concert. No, it's a phone concert. Does anybody have a different ring? Let's we'll hear all of them. We'll hear all of them. So so what I'm saying is that a new government, which is definitely not guaranteed, by the way. Mr. Netanyahu is so skilled that I wouldn't guarantee him losing, even if polls are showing that he's losing. Okay? Because he's an amazingly skilled politician. He can walk into the opposition and hand out prizes and make promises that he, of course, doesn't keep half the time, but that can lure some people into his camp on the promise of stability, on the promise of strength, on the promise of who knows what. And, he's done it before. So getting back to, I was talking about the 4 million Palestinians, they're not going anywhere. So, when everybody says to me, first of all, do you ever think there could be peace in the Middle East? I always say yes, always. And the reason is, just looking back in history, we see that countries who fought each other for hundreds of years have made peace with each other. So the precedent is there. then comes the idea of once you've tried everything else and it hasn't worked, then you have to come to the, to the next possibility, which is to have some kind of peace agreement. It's not easy. It will not happen. So I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime anyway, but it will happen at some point or other because there is no other choice. It cannot, the Palestinians will never say, okay, order 4 million moving trucks and we'll move out, which is, people have said, let's pay them to leave. We've paid so much money fighting them for so long. Why not just say, here's $1 million each times 4 million. I don't know, what does that come to? People know 40 billion about? Okay, so what? 40 billion they'll be gone. But you know what? There's a lot of them. You're not going to believe this, who would reject $1 million and say, I'm staying. I don't want your money. I know you might say, how could that be? How could that possibly be? They're not living well. But those people are as attached to their homeland as the Jews are to their homeland. That's what it comes down to. Well, the nobody wants them, the nobody wants them part comes into the other billions. That part is solvable. If you went to the government of South Sudan and said, here's $100 billion, would you take 4 million Palestinians? They say, sure. Hey, we need that $100 billion. So that's, but those kind of solutions would be opposed even by right-wing people in Israel. They'd say, wait a minute, why should we give them any money? Let's just kick them out by force. Why should we spend our taxpayer money on them? So there would be a division on that scale as well. The other choice is to say, okay, how do we solve this problem? We make one country and we give all the Palestinians Israeli citizenship. And in that way, they'll be equal citizens, and we wouldn't have this whole issue of settlers going into their territory and trying to burn them out, because they'll be citizens like everybody else. But of course, well, they won't be a majority, but they'll be a big number. And if they have voting discipline, they could vote, and become a very strong force. Let me just finish by saying they are not citizens. They can't vote. So forget that. But in the city of Jerusalem, 1/3 of the people are Palestinians, and they can vote in municipal elections, and they don't vote. And that's the stupidest decision that I have ever thought of, because the eastern part of Jerusalem, the Palestinian section, has gotten poorer and poorer and poorer. When I lived there, and I lived there for 3 years, I lived in the city of Jerusalem for 3 years, the Palestinian part of Jerusalem was the most alive and interesting part of the whole city. It was buzzing. There were businesses going left, right, and center. There were restaurants. There were souvenir stores. There were hotels. There were everything. But since politics has changed, the Palestinian citizens of Jerusalem have been completely cut off from the rest of the West Bank. Cut off physically by walls, cut off by checkpoints, cut off by everything. They can't leave and other people can't come in. So where is their business going to come from? And all the tour companies in Israel, all of you who've toured Israel and toured Jerusalem, none of you have ever been taken to the Palestinian part of Jerusalem. Why? Politics. We don't want them. We want them to be so hard off that they'll just pick up and leave. You have to reestablish your Jerusalem residency rights all the time. If you say, you know what, I want to go to Stanford University for 4 years, the Israeli government might say to you, sure, you can go, but don't expect to come back because we won't let you back. Because you've been absent from Jerusalem for X amount of months at a time. Because that's their goal. Their goal is to get rid of people. But if these people would actually be smart enough to vote in municipal politics, no one would be getting away with that. No one would be able to say, you know what, we're not giving you garbage collection because we don't feel like going to your part of the city. I mean, who would say something like that? Hey, the city council would be knocking on the mayor's door and say, I want that garbage truck down my street. But that's the stupidity. So the Arabs are their own worst enemies. The Israelis are not their worst enemies. They are their own worst enemies. Hamas is the Palestinians' enemy. Hezbollah is the Lebanese enemy. And it's just the way it is in that section of the Middle East. And that's how complicated everything is. And that's why there isn't an easy solution. So now, comments, questions. Okay, so by the way, what I wanted to speak about before Myrna's lovely intervention was my trip to Portugal, and talk about Portugal as a country and how interesting it is, and what an amazing encounter I had with the Jewish community in Portugal. So that was what my topic was going to be. But next week is next week. Wait a minute. No, Tuesday. Yeah, that's right. I'm back. So it's my one and only grandson's bar mitzvah this coming Saturday in Toronto, unfortunately. He is just a treasure to me, and the most talented, passionate young man that you could ever possibly meet. When he gets a passion about something, I'm going to make up a crazy example. Look at the wall behind you. You see it's got green paint on it? If he's passionate about green paint, he'll end up with 87 different shades of green paint. He'll show you how one shade is different from another. He'll show you the combinations that could be made with that green paint. That's how passionate he is about the things that he gets passionate about. And these things change. His first passion was vacuum cleaners. He could identify like 50 different brands of vacuum cleaners and how they worked. And that's when he was 4 years old. So his passions change, but whatever they are, he just won. Let me boast. I'm boasting. He won the archery competition for Canada of under 15-year-olds. He got the highest score in archery of anybody who participated in the whole country in an archery competition for under 15 years old. And that means shooting an arrow 60 feet into a target. You know what 60 feet is? It's longer than this room. You see, look at the red circle behind you. You see that red circle on that thing there? That's what you had to get the arrows into from 60 feet. And he's got a picture. I have a picture of him. He's posted it. He's got his 8 arrows in that little circle that he got in from 60 feet. So, that shows you what kind of devotion he has to practice to be able to get that. He even shot one arrow into another. He had an arrow in the target, in the center. He shot another arrow that hit the back of the first arrow and went into the back of the first arrow. So they came out like this big. He's got it on his wall. The one arrow stuck into another one. So anyway, that's my Joshua. So that's where I'll be from tomorrow, and Monday night I'm coming back. So that's why I'll be here next Tuesday. So comments, questions? I'm sure you must have some. Yes. I heard you say I'm not doing exercise. Did I hear you say that at the beginning? Yeah, did you say that? Did you say that to the lady beside you before? No? Oh, okay. Okay. My hearing is not the best. Yeah. Yes, that was okay. That's a very good comment. So he was saying, America supplies Israel with $3.8 billion a year of aid, of military aid. Okay? You have to realize, and so many people don't, that Israel is not only a middle state, it's now moving into being a wealthy state. in terms of per capita income. But as I said before, the division between rich and poor is very big. But still, Israel has become a very middle-class state with a higher per capita income than Germany. Okay, so that's saying something, just about. Okay, they're in the middle. They're in the middle. The middle ranking of Europe as terms of gross per capita income. But of course, because prices are so much higher in Israel, the average person, you know, even with a higher income, gets less for it. But let me just finish what he said. So he said, so the question was, and there's a lot of support in the United States for stopping military aid to Israel. The idea being that Israel is using this aid to, you know, to destroy Gaza, to bomb Iran, to get the U.S. into trouble, and it doesn't serve U.S.'s purpose. What I thought Netanyahu was going to say, which I've heard him say before, is it's not a one-way street. You're right. The United States gives $3 billion a year to Israel for military stuff, like the Iron Dome protection system and all that. But Israel gives the U.S. tons of intelligence, tons of spies, tons of all kinds of stuff. I mean, how did they find Mr. Khamenei in Tehran? Like, what did he walk around with a sign saying it's me? You know, the Israelis gave the U.S. and give the U.S. tons of intelligence and tons of new kind of development of drones and anti-aircraft, anti-drone, anti-missile protections. The Iron Dome was invented in Israel. Now the U.S. is producing all kinds of copies of this stuff. So that was what I thought he was going to say. But guess what? He didn't say anything like that at all. He said, you're right. You know, we're a rich country, and I would like to see Israel getting less money from the U.S. Now, surprisingly, but he knows where the wind is blowing, because the wind in the United States is blowing to stop giving money to Israel. So the answer was really, I thought, very, very intelligent, very smart to know where the wind is blowing. And he's a smart politician. That's what I said before. Yeah. Well, I think that he knows that if this business in Iran goes sideways, and it's already gone sideways, Israel is going to be blamed by the American public. And what he has to do is to try to minimize that blame as much as possible. To try to say that this war is the war of the West. I mean, his whole message against Hamas and against Hezbollah, his message to Europe was this: we are at the forefront of a struggle against militant Islam, and we are the ones who are taking the hits. But if we don't take them, you're going to take them sooner or later. That's his message. Now, his message, as far as Iran is concerned, is similar. Iran is a rogue power. Iran government does not represent the Iranian people. We, the Israelis, represent the Iranian people. We're doing our best to get rid of that government, and we can't obviously force that government to quit, but we're doing the best to weaken it so that the people themselves can take over. That's why you saw all the Iranian flags at the Israel Independence Day rally. That's why, I mean, the first time I saw it, I almost fell down. I was driving in Girard Park, driving my bike, and I see like old Iranian flags, the one with the royal crest on it, and Israeli flags together. I say, what's going on here? And it was nothing to do with Israel. It was an anti-Ayatollah rally by people who wanted to restore the monarchy, you know, local people, as are most Iranians living abroad. They're, of course, living abroad because they hate the government who's there now. And they see that Israel is their best hope. And so that's why you see all these, these two flags together. So yes, so that's that's the message that Netanyahu is trying to say, that we are in a way the forefront of doing for the West what the West can't do for themselves. We want to get rid of the government in Iran. We want to get rid of the militant Muslims, and we're willing to sacrifice our own lives to do that. So that's his message. Now, sometimes it sells. More recently, it's not selling because the cameras don't lie. When you walk into Gaza and you say, okay, you're fighting a war against Hamas, but look what you've done. You've destroyed 80% of all the buildings in Gaza. People are living in tents in the rain. When you're bombing people, somehow or other children end up being killed or in the hospital. So how is that